buy a used graphics card? This is probably a statement you've heard before, but to be honest, if you go with used compared to new, you can save quite a bit of money and maybe even get some more performance while you're at it. But you might be a bit apprehensive of buying something used. What if it doesn't work? What if there's issues? What if I need to clean it? Well, let's put those doubts to rest, and I'm going to show you why you should in fact buy a used graphics card. And the main reason why you should buy a used graphics card is purely down to value. Used GPUs are often very cheaper than their new counterparts, so you'll be getting more performance for your dollar. Like my RTX 3080 Founders Edition, which I bought in 2022 for £550, where brand new they were selling for around 700 plus back then, which was a lot for a graphics card. This was at sort of the end of the mining craze, if any of you remember that. Those times were completely wild, but I did score quite a good deal back then on a 3080. Despite that, this trend still carries on today, because instead of buying a new graphics card like the RTX 4060, which goes for around $300 brand new, you could always pick up something used like this RTX 2080. I paid about £170, maybe even less, for this Strix model, and this should be at least on par with that graphics card. Granted, there is one downside to used GPUs, and that is probably they might consume a bit more power than their new counterparts, as newer graphics cards tend to be a bit more efficient. But for the money that you save, it's probably going to be worth it, because like I saved a good at least £100 going with a 2080 compared to a 4060. And older cards tend to have better memory configurations than modern budget ones for some reason, as this has a 256-bit memory bus compared to the 128-bit of the 4060, meaning I've got more memory bandwidth, which should help out with performance at higher resolutions, such as 1440p. I think this is a good example of getting the same performance at a much lower price, as to be honest, my biggest issue with modern budget graphics cards is their complete lack of value, particularly with the current generation, like the RTX 4060 and RX 7600. The value on these GPUs isn't particularly great, and that's mainly down to just older graphics cards like this selling for very affordable prices on the used market. And this brings me on to my next point. You can spend the same amount of money as a new graphics card and get much more performance. Taking a look at the RTX 4060 again, if you were to spend that $300 on a used graphics card, you could get something like the RTX 3070. This is still a very powerful graphics card despite its 8GB of VRAM, which admittedly the RTX 4060 also has, but like the 2080, it has a 256-bit memory bus, meaning it's got more memory bandwidth, and it's also got a lot more rasterization and ray tracing performance, as the RTX 3070 will absolutely smoke a 4060 in basically any gaming workload for the same price if you were to buy one of those used. If you were looking on Team Red, you could also get something like the 6700 XT in place of the RTX 4060. This has 12GB of VRAM, and it often sells for around $250 on the used market, which I think is a brilliant deal for one of these graphics cards, as yeah, the 1440p and the 1080p gaming experience from this GPU is absolutely brilliant. One downside to buying a used GPU is you need to practice some risk management. If something seems too good to be true, it usually is, and probably doubly so with used GPUs. Because if one is going for around like $100 or $150 less than like the usual asking price, odds are you might get hosed on that. Albeit this can also be true for new GPUs as well, especially on marketplaces like eBay and Amazon. But what you don't get with new GPUs is lemons. From my experience, if a graphics card looks like it's a bit of a dud, it usually is. Like with this RX 580 8GB here, the Cora was all oxidized, there's quite a bit of corrosion on here, and it just generally doesn't look like it's been looked after. Luckily, because I bought this one from a friend, I did manage to get a bit of a refund, and even he knew it was a bit of a risk selling this to me, so all was good there. But if this happened to you on eBay, potentially you might be able to get your money back, but if it's through a site like Facebook Marketplace, you might not be able to get your hard-earned cash back. So this is why I recommend doing your research, looking at the graphics card, and if anything seems dodgy to you, just don't buy it, because odds are it's probably going to be a bit of a dud. There are some minor downsides to used graphics cards, and this one does heavily depend on the seller, and that is you might need to clean it. Depending on how the previous owner treated the graphics card, you might need to clean it out, or you might need to reapply thermal paste. If that's the case, this is a relatively easy fix, and I do have a guide here on the channel for it. It is a bit older, but it will be linked up there. But to be honest, this isn't really that hard of a task, and it's really rare that you're going to break anything, as long as you're careful. But with that being said, with about half of the used GPUs I've bought, I haven't had to clean them or change the thermal paste, as they were relatively in decent condition. And with about half of the ones that I've cleaned, they could have been totally fine without cleaning, but I just wanted them to be in the best optimal sort of condition, as I do benchmark these graphics cards, and I want them to be performing at their absolute best with minimal variables involved, I suppose. And a big downside to used graphics cards is they usually have no warranty. Sometimes professional sellers, like businesses, will offer a 6-month warranty on used graphics cards, which is good. And a big reseller of GPUs here in the UK called CEX, they offer a 12 or 24-month warranty on any purchase, which is very good. But if you're buying from sites like eBay, from private sellers, odds are you're going to have no warranty, and any protection outside of eBay's buy protection, you're not going to be covered in the case of a GPU failure. In all fairness, out of like 50 used graphics cards I've ever bought, about 3 of them have failed, and I've got a refund on one, and the other 2, they were absolutely total lemons, and I knew I was taking a risk when I bought them, so there is that. So if you factor in these risks and you keep your wits about you while you're buying a used graphics card, you should end up with a nice decent model. Like this 2080 here, this was in impeccable condition. And just take me as an example, I've bought around 50 used GPUs ever since around 2019, and I've had, well, like 3 fail on me, but they were like risky GPU purchases anyway, and I kind of knew that it was a big gamble to begin with. But graphics cards like my RTX 3080, my RK 750 and my 1080 Ti I have used for multiple years on end, and they've been totally fine. There's been absolutely zero issues with them, outside of like the odd clean, and that could be down to because I've used them for quite a while. So if you keep your wits about you, the hardest thing you'll have to do with a used graphics card is just give it a clean, maybe change the thermal pads or thermal paste. And to be honest, I've only ever had to change the thermal pads once on a graphics card. But if you want absolutely zero risks when buying a graphics card and you want that warranty, there's absolutely no harm in buying a new GPU. Just know the value probably won't be as good as something used. And if you want to see one of the best used GPUs right now, there's a video right up there for that. And I'll catch you in the next one.